Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Planning Your Path, How to Become a Leader in Data and AI with Vector Institute and Phase AI. My name is Johanna, and on behalf of everyone at Vector, I want to thank you for spending this time with us today. We know that having a long-term career plan is really important, and many of you may be interested in becoming leaders in AI, but it might be confusing about how to get there and figuring out which path you want to follow. So we hope today's session will help you prepare for a successful career by exploring some of those trends and how they'll impact your planning, reviewing some frameworks and tools for how to plan out your career strategically. And lastly, you'll get to hear some from industry leaders through a panel discussion and their own paths. I would like to begin by acknowledging and thanking our funders, the province of Ontario, the government of Canada through the Pan-Canadian AI Strategy administered by CFAR, and industry sponsors from around the Canadian economy. I also want to take the time and acknowledge the land on which Vector is located in Toronto, which is now a meeting place for many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, as well as newcomers to Canada from around the globe. The land we are situated on is the traditional territory of many nations. The Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We acknowledge that Toronto was covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands, and we are very grateful for being hosted on this land. Before we begin today's session, I would just like to add that if you really enjoy this session, we do have some openings available with Wojciech, who is leading today's session. So if you're interested in a group career consultation and how to position your own project pitch, I'll drop the link in the chat so you can sign up if you're interested, as there are some spots available. And I would also now like to introduce Wojciech, who is from Phase AI, and as I mentioned, will be delivering today's webinar. Wojciech is an AI researcher and data scientist and an alumnus of Oxford University, where he studied on a Rhodes Scholarship. In addition to working with organizations to build out their AI strategies, teams, and AI-driven products, he also founded and sold his own company in customer analytics. So an incredible career thus far. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Wojciech.
Hi, Johanna. Thank you so much for having me today, and I'm excited to be here and to help everyone think, plan, explore their careers. I'll start by sharing my screen. So you should all be seeing Planning Your Path, How to Become a Leader in Data and AI. So as Johanna mentioned, there's a few things that we will be covering today. I'll have a brief introduction. We'll talk a little bit for about 5 minutes about planning for 2024, what trends we're seeing since the last webinar. We'll talk about long-term planning for AI ML careers, looking specifically at different types of career paths, particularly the distinction between a technical expert and a manager, as well as different seemingly meandering paths that had actual concrete strategies and led to pretty great results for folks. We'll talk about frameworks and strategies. This will be a little more abstract, but if you're curious how to make your own decisions, how to build your own plans, and how to address your own challenges, that's going to be the section for you. And then we'll spend a little bit of time on pivoting in case you need to make changes further down the line before we go to a panel discussion where we've got some great Vector alumni and current members of the Vector Institute that will be talking about their career paths and some of the challenges and opportunities they've seen. So just to get started, a brief introduction about myself to go a little bit beyond what Johanna mentioned so kindly. My name is Wojciech. It's nice to meet you. I've certainly met a lot of you through various one-on-ones. My email is w@phaseai.com. So if we don't get to the content that we need to get through today, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to follow up. In terms of the work that I've done, I've been very fortunate to go across both sides, from being a researcher at organizations like Oxford, at IBM Research, to being more on the managerial and I'm going to say consultant/customer side at McKinsey and at Canopy Labs as well, which was a customer data platform. With Phase AI, we've been working very closely with companies to help them launch AI-driven products. And so over the last few years, we've seen quite a few different organizations launch AI-driven products, AI-driven strategies, and build AI teams. So we've seen a lot of the challenges they have. And I hope this webinar, as well as the ones that we've already run, will help you make your own decisions, make your own, or inform your decisions, excuse me, in your career path. If you do have any questions, the Q&A is open throughout the webinar. Please submit them there. I'll be looking at them throughout, and I'll also make time at the major sections of this webinar to answer some of them, and they'll also inform the panel. So please feel free to submit questions. Overwhelm me with questions. So just to get started, before we actually dive in, I'd like to run a poll, which is, how do you feel about the job market today? If we could get the poll up, that would be wonderful. Take a minute just to answer this question. Do you feel great? You expect to have a role in 2 to 3 months? Are you okay? This is no different than other times in the past. Is this concerning, or are you just completely losing it? If we can get the answers potentially, if we have enough participants. Let's see. Okay. So I'm looking at the numbers from last time. They're pretty consistent, actually. So 58% are concerned. This is harder than before. 26%, 1 in 4 are completely losing it. And a few of you are feeling pretty good about it. So thank you for that. Well, what I will say, similar to the last webinar, if you are concerned, there is good news. There is certainly some challenging news in the short run, but there's a lot of good news as well that I'm going to share, hopefully for all of you here. And with that, we'll talk about planning for 2024. So this is the news that most people are seeing when they think about starting a job today. And this is probably where the poll is coming from, right? Layoffs are going up. At least in the short term. There's a lot of companies announcing layoffs. There's a lot of confusion about what sorts of layoffs are actually taking place. And this is scary, right? And so I just want to emphasize that there is good news. If you actually look at the deeper employment numbers, or the deeper unemployment numbers, as the case may be, employment is rising in professional, scientific, and technical services, number one. There is still a lot of demand. If you look at the longer term trends and patterns here, which we've talked about in the last few webinars, data science, AI, ML are all things that every employer is talking about hiring in the next 12, 24, 36 months. So even though right now you might feel a little stressed out, know that you're on the right path. And if you were to make any sort of decision, which industry to focus on, data, AI, ML, this is a good place to be right now. One of the things that is also coming up a lot is companies are doing both hiring and layoffs at the same time. And well, I would say this is actually a bit unique for this period compared to other periods, and just important to know that. The main reason that this is actually happening is that companies are actually a lot more active in reskilling and repurposing their workforce than in the past. They're expecting that productivity will go up because of this AI-powered future that we keep hearing about. And so what's very common right now, in fact, is that companies are laying off certain teams that they think will become more productive because of AI, i.e. they'll need fewer people, and they're focused on AI-oriented hiring instead. So that means actual data, AI, ML folks. Again, lots of demand there, but it also means hiring people who have upskilled themselves or reskilled themselves in some way to use AI-powered tools to be better at the jobs that they're applying for. And so as a side note, one thing that's very, very important right now, as you're going through the process of looking for a role, potentially emphasize how you can use those AI-powered tools to be more productive, to push the company forward in new and unique ways. As a case in point, we see articles like this all the time, tech companies axing jobs to pivot into AI. Really, this important piece around pivoting to AI is what you should be looking for. A few other things that are really important that are starting now from a trends perspective that I expect certainly to continue in the next few years and well into the 2030s. Again, AI skills are permeating existing job postings. So one of the questions that just came up is specifically around how do we know if layoffs are related to non-AI roles. One is, of course, press coverage, but the second is look at the job postings that they do have. Now, if they have no job postings, then of course, they're probably not hiring. The layoffs are probably just more general ones. But what the job postings will probably be talking about is experience with, ChatGPT or Gemini, Claude, things like that. Or if you're looking at data AI roles specifically, they might be talking about new technologies that go beyond simply software engineering or coding in Python. A few other things that companies are really concerned about that, again, if you're starting your career now, you might want to double down on productization of AI. It's really easy to have a good demo with generative AI. It's really hard to scale that up. So most companies have these wonderful demos and pilot programs, and like 90% of the companies will say that they have something like this. And then very few companies are actually taking that and scaling it to their entire workforce. Related to that is AI transformations. How do you actually consult in this process? AI policy guidance, regulatory fears. How do companies actually address some of the challenges that governments are having as well? And the last thing to know as well is, very few companies are actually building Gen AI models themselves. Many are using large language models, foundation models, things like that, but very few are actually building them from scratch. So depending on how you're framing yourself, or if you're overwhelmed by, the latest and greatest LLM publications or foundation model publications, know that simply knowing how to use these things, how to evaluate them, is a huge opportunity as well. Other things to keep in mind for you specifically, avoiding AI demos that simply use Gen AI APIs. This is something I'm noticing particularly over the last 6 months. People are applying for roles and they show really cool demos, but all they're doing is using the REST APIs with OpenAI or Claude or Google, the Google Cloud platform. And so you're not really telling me you know anything about AI. You simply know that you can call a REST API. Similarly, avoid skill spam. It's very common for people to post a lot of different skills on their resumes. Focus on quality over quantity, focus on unique skills and expertise. And finally, a few things that have come up in the one-on-ones themselves over the last few weeks. Remember that all your experience makes you a well-rounded and interesting person. Oftentimes people are worried about international experience versus Canadian experience, or maybe jobs they've had that aren't relevant to AI and ML. As someone who's worked in customer analytics, one of the things I absolutely loved doing was hiring data scientists who had retail experience, even if they were just working in customer service or something like that, because at least they knew what the reality on the ground was. So remember, tell your story, tell it proudly. That's very, very important. Other details, tactics like 1 or 2 pages, the resume flow, that's all important. We can cover that. But really, if you're telling a good story, remember this, if you're telling a good story, you're going to be fine. And of course, consistently build your network. Another thing, particularly as you start your career, I find a lot of people get their job, they stop networking. And as a result, their network becomes weaker and weaker over time because they don't support the people that they've met and they know. If you were to meet 2 new people every day per working day, you'd be growing your network by roughly 500 people a year. Remember that. It's very easy to do, very quick, and very, very powerful. I won't go through all of this, but if you're interested in all of this content, the webinar we ran around getting ahead and staying ahead covers a lot of it in detail. So please feel free to check that out. It's all available on YouTube. With that in mind, another thing I'll encourage you is please feel free to submit questions again. Submit them throughout. One thing that I'm also curious about, and you could submit this as a question, even though it might not be a question. What are the top concerns that you have? So we know that about 70%, 75% of us are either concerned or really concerned when it comes to the job search. Even if you don't have a question, tell me in the Q&A, what is it? What themes, what ideas, what concepts are causing you stress? And I'll try to cover them as well. So before we go into long-term planning, I'll see very, very quickly if there's anything coming up here. A few questions have been submitted, so thank you for that. One really interesting one is recommending any AI products that reliably and accurately predict near future job postings before they're published on company web pages, LinkedIn. Well, that's a really interesting question. Unfortunately, I don't know of any tools that specifically do that, but there are a whole bunch of different AI-powered tools that will crawl job postings for you. And so in some cases, you could also use them to automatically apply for jobs. I don't necessarily recommend that, to be perfectly honest, because you're not actually intentionally applying, you're overwhelming the recruiter, and you're not customizing your application. So your mileage isn't going to be very good there. But crawling job postings and seeing what are the skills that are coming up regularly is really, really valuable. The other thing that I do find doing is that I find helpful, is passively look at what the job postings are day over day. You'll notice these trends even within weeks, believe it or not. There's so much changing in this Gen AI world right now that companies are literally changing the skills that they're hiring for or clarifying the skills that they are hiring for pretty quickly. I'll go through more questions later as well, but right now I'll talk a little bit about long-term planning for AI ML careers. So again, one really quick poll that I'm very curious about is, let's start with your goals. I'm curious, do you know exactly where you want to be, let's say 5 years out, or do you know, or you're completely unsure? Just select yes or no. Again, both are fine. Don't remember that it's okay not to know, but I'm curious to see how confident people are in their plans right now. So let's get the results up. Okay, that's actually a pretty even split. So we have about so 38 people are saying yes, they know where they want to be 5 years out, and 62% are saying no. So that's more even than I expected. I expected like 85% no's. So very, very interesting there. So what's wonderful about those who do know is some of this will be a bit easier for you because the advice here, you do kind of have to at least have a hypothesis around where you want to go. But remember, if you don't have that, it's okay not to know. And it's also okay for plans to change. In fact, one of the things I'd like to do right now is walk through 4 real career paths. The names have been changed, the photos have been changed, but these are people that I've either hired or worked with or supported through the various one-on-ones in the past. And I just wanted to illustrate how career paths could look for people, and especially how different they could be over time. So let's start with Kathy. So Kathy is the head of ML for a fintech unicorn. She got her start with a PhD in physics. The very, very first thing she did was started a startup as a CTO. So it was the technical co-founder in this case. Eventually joined a fintech startup and moved from data science to engineering management. And there was a pretty big fork in the road for her where she had to decide at one point whether to stay in a management role in engineering, focusing on engineering management, or go back into data science. And in some ways, linear path, always going up and up and up, and then eventually deciding, actually, instead of engineering management, I'm going to go back into data science. A, what I love in this case, potentially, and B, something that maybe she was really good at. One thing to keep in mind, she ended up managing a smaller team, but I think is much more happy for it. Another example that is a little more linear as well is Bob, data science manager at Afang. So in this case, what I like about Bob's profile, excuse me, is where he initially started. Has an undergrad in commerce. A lot of data science roles will not necessarily hire commerce folks or business grads. And what I like about him is it was his patient approach initially to building that capability and skill set. Started as a business analyst, eventually got promoted to a data analyst role at a media company, then became a data scientist, and eventually a data science manager at a tech startup. One big fork in the road for Bob was whether to continue with startups and smaller companies, or take what I would call a title downgrade to work at Afang. It's very, very common for people who are moving from smaller companies to larger ones to take some sort of a downgrade. You might be a VP of data, let's say, or a CTO even at a startup that might be 30 people in size. But if you were to join something much larger, 1,000 or 10,000 employees, it's not like you're going to join to be the CTO there. And so it's very common to have to take that quote unquote hit. Some people really struggle with that. And this was a fork in the road for Bob. Today, data science manager at Afang. Now, 2 less linear paths. Shirley, VP of data science at a consumer tech company, also an undergrad in economics, spent the first few years working as an analyst in different firms, a consulting firm, cybersecurity company, large bank. And this is a good example of someone that would probably get a lot of criticism, frankly. And this comes up again in my one-on-ones with folks quite a bit, where this looks like someone who's meandering. Why are they switching jobs every 12 months? Are they getting fired? Are they not very good at what they're doing? Are they unsure of what they want? And maybe that's the case. Maybe the last case, especially, they're exploring different industries. And this is something that I wanted to share because Shirley's profile is one that shows that even though you start off potentially in a meandering path, you could end up in a really, really great roles, and you learn a lot by building that a treasure trove of expertise. First fork in the road was, do I get a master's degree? In her case, the answer was yes. The second fork in the road was, even with a technical master's degree, and stats in her case. Do I focus on business operations or stats? And she ended up going down the ops path of things. So had 4 roles in ops, focusing on customer data. And today she's at a VP of data science at a huge consumer products co. Obviously, I don't want to share names, but you've definitely used their products. And again, this is what I like, because if you were one of the people who voted, no, you're not sure where you want to be, and maybe you even have a career path like Shirley's start here, where you're going through different companies or different roles, that's okay. You're going to learn a lot, and you're going to have some really great strengths and experiences you could leverage. Finally, Mike, PhD in comp sci, consultant, a team lead as well. Fork in the road was staying consulting or move client side. And again, similar to Shirley, moved to client side and then really swapped industries quite a bit. Behavioral analytics in real estate, marketing analytics in CPG, customer data and tech, and now a chief analytics officer in a pharma company. He was using a really interesting strategy that we'll talk about, which is this concept I call 1 foot in, 1 foot out. His core strength was customer data, right? Analytics, analyzing customer data, looking at trends, etc. But he was able to, with that strength, explore lots of different other spaces and build an area of expertise that is in some ways very, very unique, and which is why he's now the chief analytics officer. So as you noticed some of these paths, there's a few questions that are coming up. Should you be a technical expert or a manager? Should you maybe be working on-site or remote? A small company like a startup, or a big company where you might be lower on the food chain, so to speak, local, global. There's a whole bunch of these different questions that people are asking themselves. And I'll deep dive into some of these. The first one being the technical expert versus manager path. So this one in particular is one that comes up a lot, so I'll spend a little more time on it. People will often come out with data science, analytics, analyst type degrees, and a few years down the line, they'll have to make this decision, or it feels like they'll have to make this concrete decision of, do I go deeper and deeper on a specific technical topic, or do I work my way up in terms of team size, team management, managing people, etc. Both paths are great. Both paths can allow you to be very successful, and I'll show you examples of this. What I want to talk a little about first is the technical expert. So the story here, I think, if you're debating which one of these to be, the technical expert is a good one if you're really enjoying solving technical problems, architecting, designing solutions, and you want to double down on these skills. The starting point here is actually very similar to manager. You'll start as an analyst, as an engineer developer. Chances are you won't start in a more generalist role if you want to be a technical expert, just because it's hard to go from generalist to technical. The skills that you'll be focusing on are architecture, again, systems design, but also the qualities and skills you might be thinking about here are technical speed, mentoring people rather than managing them, and also focusing on optimization. So this is really about going really, really deep on very specific problems. And later I'll be talking about small versus big companies. I'll also say that big companies are generally better at supporting technical experts. You know, if you think about a company like Google, just, you know, a company we've all heard of, they have very, very, very niche roles that focus on search quality, that focus on ML engineering, that focus on chip design for their TPUs. That's an example where you could be a technical expert and really contribute quite a lot. Smaller companies generally need people who are a little more flexible. How to progress? The biggest thing I tell people here is, if you want to explore being a technical expert, take R&D risks. Commit to projects that are a little uncertain, where the R&D still needs to be completed. You're going to be taking a risk here because maybe the thing you're going to commit to doing is not possible or harder than expected. But the flip side is, if you're focusing on that R&D and producing good results, then you're going to do really well. On the manager side of things, a little different in that the challenge here, the story that you're really looking for with yourself, is that you enjoy coordinating people, coordinating ideas, opinions, plans, etc. And one mistake people often make here in terms of expert versus manager is, oh, well, I'm introverted or I'm extroverted, so I'm either going to be, you know, extroverted equals manager, introverted equals technical expert. That's definitely not the case. There's a lot of really great introverted managers and leaders. There's a lot of really good extroverted technical experts. This is basically focused more on what is the problem that you want to solve and the energy that you want to expend to solving those problems. Again, starting points here, you'll notice, are the same, but the generalist roles are more likely to be on the manager path here. And skills, the other piece that you want to look for is, do you enjoy planning? Do you enjoy communication, facilitating meetings? Do you get a kick out of even almost having hypotheses about how meetings will go. And if so, then this is a great place to be. Whereas the technical expert focuses on optimization, the manager will often focus on things like shipping business results and working with people. And here, if you're thinking about maybe exploring the manager path, the thing that I would encourage you to do is take bigger risks around coordination. Commit to working with multiple stakeholders, commit to maybe running a meeting or facilitating an event or facilitating a meeting of some sort. See how you like it. At the end of it all, almost do a postmortem or debrief with yourself and see how you feel. The other thing that is really important for both roles, but in a different way, is this idea of organizational competence. When we start our careers, we typically have a technical background of some sort, whether that's programming or data science or AI research. We also have personal competence. We know how we work, we know how we operate. The one thing that we often don't have at the start of our careers is this ability, this thing that's called organizational competence. We don't necessarily know how to do collaborative problem solving because we haven't done that in a corporate environment. We don't know how to get things done by coordinating different parts of a company. And one of the things that I would recommend as you think about your career, challenge yourself to learn how to be competent in terms of getting the organization to do things. This means, again, understanding organizational dynamics, getting stuff done within a group setting, excuse me. And if you're a technical expert, this will probably focus more on that facilitation side of things, facilitating interesting projects, research, taking those R&D risks. On the manager side, the people manager side of things, it'll be much more focused on literal coordination of people and delegating or sharing tasks rather than doing it all yourself. Again, at the start of the career, our careers, we're usually individual contributors. We're doing the tasks that we're supposed to do. We're not delegating, we're not facilitating, we're not influencing. A few other things just to think that I'll go through a little bit more quickly. On-site and remote, this is coming up more and more, even although I think there was a sort of a reduction in remote roles post-COVID. I still think quite a few companies are focused on this. Both, again, are great. You could have a great remote career. You could have a great career on site. Obviously, that's been happening for decades. One of the things that I would really encourage you to think about here is how intentional are you comfortable being with your career? When you're on site, there's a lot of things that are happening around you that you could sort of just participate in. There's events, there's people talking, there's lunch meetings. You might just grab a coffee with folks that are nearby. If you're working remotely, all of this is still possible, but you have to be a lot more intentional about it. There's less opportunity for serendipity. And so if you are working remote, or if you're thinking about working remote, have a calendar reminder or something that regularly tells you to meet new people, reach out to someone that you haven't reached out to in the past, or even a part of the organization that you don't know very well, and do a virtual coffee or something like that. This is really important to build those relationships. And this is particularly true if you want to try things like facilitation or coordination, or find opportunities that might not be explicitly handed to you. Small co versus big co. This is a spectrum. Small co could be 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, sometimes could be considered a small company. And then you've got companies that might have thousands, tens of thousands of employees. Again, really big differences here. One of the things I recommend, similar to some of the career profiles that we looked at, if you're starting early, I actually recommend exploring both. Some people are really good at managing the politics and the challenges of a large organization. Some people really enjoy the flexibility and uncertainty of working in a small company. And if you've got co-op terms that are coming up, or if you're really literally entering your first role right now and have a few years still before you really want to make any decisions, spending a year at a small company, spending a year at a large company will show you just how different they are. And in a similar way, I mentioned for technical experts, for example, big companies often know how to use them a bit better. The one exception to this is really small, extremely technical companies. If you're working on a 10-person startup that's optimizing, I don't know, LiDAR or something, then obviously everyone's going to be a technical expert there. Big companies are also very good at structuring things like mentorship programs, training programs, etc. Small companies generally are a little more flexible. And the nice thing, flexible, maybe less formal training programs. On the flip side, you'll probably be exposed to different roles and tasks that you might not be exposed to otherwise. Local and global. This is one I think that's particularly unique to folks that are starting out, especially if you've got an international background. again, there's no right answer here, but working in a global environment comes with its own challenges, different cultures, a hybrid meetings, right? You'll have people on Zoom and you'll have people in the office. And global could mean different things. I'm going to say national is more on the global side, right? If you're meeting with folks from Halifax and Vancouver and you're based in Toronto, different cultures, different lived experiences there. And that'll be a really interesting opportunity to learn how to coordinate, influence people, deal with some of their challenges, etc. When you're local, and everybody's similar to each other, particularly in that local small co example, then you might actually take a lot of this for granted. You might assume that everybody's a LiDAR expert, and I can guarantee you they're not. So that's an example that you'll want to think about in some of the trade-offs that you'll want to explore. Now, if you do go through any of these different paths, the thing that I really, really want to emphasize here is that wherever you start, you could actually go in so many different directions. And so here's an example of 4 different job postings that have all been posted by the same company looking for about 10 years of experience. So this is 10 years out from when you're starting off, but all in the product organization at this big company. So suppose that you have a master's degree in comp sci, you're starting your first job as an analyst of some sort, or maybe even a developer for this product-led division at a big company. 10 years out, starting at the bottom here, you might become a director of product engineering. This is, I think, the most obvious path that people do take, right? You're going to manage a team, you're going to manage shipping product and code, and they're going to look for experience doing that sort of thing. Maybe instead you realize that you're really good with customers and you're good with coordinating salespeople as well. In that case, maybe you'll become a lead solutions consultant. And in this case, you'll enjoy solving customer problems, enjoy architecting solutions and facilitation, but not management. So again, going to different team members, talking about product features, talking about customer needs, they're not reporting to you, but you're working with them in a slightly different way. Then on the more technical expert side of things, maybe you'll become a head of analytics, where you're going to be ensuring project delivery. You're going to be building dashboards. You're going to be analyzing the data to understand how users are using your product, and you're going to oversee that strategy. You're going to generate requirements for analytics, but you might actually be working on your own, similar to the solutions consultant, but more internal rather than external facing. And finally, maybe you'll become a staff data scientist. You'll have experience with R, Python, Julia. You'll be building and analyzing your own data sets, managing end-to-end projects. And one thing that I found really interesting here for this specific role is they're looking for someone who can speak and present on analytics. And this is that example I mentioned of introverted versus extroverted, right? If you enjoy speaking and presenting and collaborating, getting feedback, you might be very, very extroverted, but you might still decide to be a technical expert, i.e. a staff data scientist in this case, because you also enjoy doing data analysis. So again, personality types aren't always correlated with the roles themselves. If you are curious, if you're not sure where you fall when it comes to career paths, I highly recommend going to websites for companies that have thousands of employees and hundreds of open jobs, and filter specifically on people that are, or on roles, excuse me, that require 10 or 15 years of experience. And you'll see some of these different roles, and you'll see what those requirements are, what are the stories that people want to tell. And one other thing that I want to emphasize here, if you are thinking about this sort of thing, is as you progress through your career, your educational background and those technical things you did, courses, papers published, if you're switching from academia to the corporate world, will become less relevant in some cases, and the business results that you drive will become more and more relevant. So one other thing to keep in mind here is really drive business results as you're exploring and going through these career paths. So if I go back to Shirley, for example, one of the things that I like about her in relation to this sort of path is this focus where after fork in the road number 2, she spent a lot of time exploring roles. She had 4 different roles in operations, all focusing on customer data before deciding to double down on data science. And that exploration, again, is something that you could do by reading job postings and just deciding, no, that's not for me, or yes, this is exactly what I want to do. Or it could actually mean that the next 3 or 4 years, you might be in 2 or 3 different roles or work on different projects at your employer where you actually test this stuff out and see whether you truly want to do something or not. As you go through this process, the other thing that I want to keep in mind here is some of the leadership qualities that are almost universal. Again, they'll come up in different ways, whether you are a technical expert or whether you are a like a manager, but one is architecture. And I put in brackets technical architecture because this could be systems, this could be organizational architecture. But the point is, as you progress through your career and develop your leadership capabilities, oftentimes many roles require you to be more of an architect, to oversee multiple things, to use the pattern recognition that you develop to actually address problems and work with people. The second is facilitating technical problem solving. And the operative word here is facilitation. As you get that experience as well, it's really important to learn how you can coordinate meetings, how you can coordinate brainstorms, work with different types of researchers or different types of roles in general so that you could address problems. As you work up that chain, you'll be less in the details of the day-to-day in terms of the specific sales calls or the specific product features or the specific bugs that are coming up. So that facilitation piece becomes really important. Similarly, communication, especially around simplifying deep, complex technical concepts. This is a superpower. There's so few people who can do this. And when you can actually take a complicated problem that no one understands and just simplify it, like forget solving it, just actually clarify what it actually means, you're already going to be very, very successful. And you could also practice this, by the way. One of the things that we recommend in our group sessions is to record yourself for 30 seconds explaining a difficult problem. You're on a time limit. You have to record yourself. You'll watch the video afterwards and you'll see whether what you said was clear at all. You could do that on your own. Finally, the other leadership quality is strategy, actually deciding what the long-term benefits, goals, challenges will be. So it's not just about getting a ticket and closing it. It's about thinking, okay, well, if this is the problem today, if we're, let's say, debating whether to architect our software using approach X versus Y, what are the long run impacts here? What happens a year from now, 2 years from now? Similarly, particularly within AI ML, R&D risk. Sure, it's easy to build that cool ChatGPT powered demo today, but how do we scale this? How much will it cost? Will it be expensive? One of the things that often comes up with Phase AI as we're working with different product organizations is the demos are quick, they're cheap, and because you're only making a few dozen API calls, and then the organization says, wait a second, if we scale this to 10,000 employees, this is going to be really expensive. How do we reduce the costs? That's something that you could have thought about literally on day one because the pricing is transparent and you could have solved yourself a lot of heartache. So that sort of strategic thinking is really, really critical. And again, something that you can certainly expose yourself to within your organization. Ways that you could do this, take step up roles in your current job, networking, and keep looking for jobs. I encourage people to literally interview for roles, respond to recruiters if they reach out to you, because even if you're not interested in making the switch, learning what the opportunities are, what recruiters are looking for, what stories they want you to tell is really, really important. And the last piece that I want to emphasize here is volunteering, particularly early on in your career. I don't think enough people volunteer, to be perfectly honest. And what I mean by volunteering here is you can learn to do collaborative problem solving by getting involved in a nonprofit organization where you help with technical strategy. You could organize meetups. If you're thinking about a technical expert path and you're not sure how deep you want to get, you can volunteer for open source projects or even get involved in summer projects like Bloom or Aya. And so Bloom and Aya, in this case, for those who don't know, are LLM projects. Bloom was something that was run by Hugging Face, where hundreds, if not thousands, of researchers got together to build a large language model over the summer. Aya is coming out of Cohere, focusing on languages that are underrepresented in kind of more common LLMs. And Sea Lion is a similar example that's focusing on Indonesian, Malaysian languages, for example. So these are things where people are looking for volunteers. They need help, and you're going to get exposure to how to build an LLM, which is pretty cool. Open source software, same idea. You could look at LangChain, which started as an open source Discord community. They still have both the open source and the Discord piece. You could look at OpenAI's evals. I guarantee you that if you're exploring things like evals and contributing to evals with OpenAI, lots of people will want to talk to you. And there's many more projects that you can look on GitHub for. What I recommend is if you're thinking of doing this, look for projects that have active communities on Discord, Slack, whatever, and ones that have active contributors. You don't want to start contributing to a project that was shut down or is dying a slow death. And volunteering locally. Many nonprofits struggle with technology committees and finding people and helping with coding, website design, or just helping with the strategic decision making around these things is really important. And again, this is a great way to get jobs, or at the very least to put really interesting work experience on your resume. So I'm going to save this Q&A because we're at about 12:40, but I'll come back to to Q&A afterwards, and certainly with the panel. So let's talk. Right now we've been talking in some ways, very tactically. Specific things you could do from an open source perspective, specific things that you could do with decisions around roles or reading about different opportunities out there. So let's take a step back and say, well, what are some of the frameworks and decision-making approaches that you might be able to take here? So first, if you've got a vision for yourself, that's great. Let's strategize and then execute. There's a few very specific types of frameworks that I encourage people to think about here when they're planning what they should be learning, how they should be learning, etc. The first is this concept of T-shaped people. And what you really want to do from a storytelling perspective, as well as you go through your career, from a general self-promotion perspective, is framing yourself as a T-shaped AI ML expert. What this means is there's a few skills that you need that you're generally competent in, and then one area where you're deeply, deeply specialized in. And this applies to both managers as well as technical experts. So on the technical expert side, that the body of the T, so to speak, would be things like reinforcement learning or data set design. Data set design is a really interesting one right now, in my opinion, because within the Gen AI world, actually knowing which data sets to use to train the LLMs, forget about training the LLMs, just getting the right data, getting the licensing for it, and knowing that those data sets exist. This is a role people now have. And I remember hearing the other day about Mistral specifically being lauded for the fact that they're very good at using their training data, because they're building some incredible models. And so that's an example of roles that are coming up that might not even exist, or skills that might not even show up in job postings, that if you have it, people will want it. And of course, the broad expertise is still communication, it's still DevOps, it's still architecture. On the manager side, this could be getting deep in things like managing teams of PhD level researchers. This is one that I recently saw in a job posting, where if you're comfortable working with folks who have PhDs and you know how to be that translator between the PhD level researchers and the rest of the organization, you are going to be a great manager. But broad expertise is the same as before: organizational competence, communication, knowing a little bit about DevOps, MLOps, etc. So remember, the skills for that generalist piece are generally the same, and then just pick the stuff that you really, really want to go deep on. The way that you might want to do that, to decide what is that thing you go deep on, is running a regular SWOT analysis. This is another thing that I think a lot of people hear this advice, is do a SWOT analysis once a year, let's say. Think about your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities, threats, but they don't do it. They hear it, we all agree and nod, yes, that's a good idea, and then we go off and never touch the SWOT. And so I highly recommend this as something that you do. You might even do it quarterly earlier on in your career. The thing is, how you ask these questions, I think, is really important. So it's not just like, my strengths are the things that I'm good at. That's really hard to answer. What are the things that you're proudest of? What are the things that people specifically go to you? What evidence do you have that you're good at these things within your work environment? Weaknesses, same idea. Are there things that you are specifically avoiding? And it doesn't mean you have to work on them, by the way. Oftentimes the advice for people that have certain weaknesses is, you know what, double down on your strengths. You're good at this other stuff, don't worry about the weaknesses. But where you might want to change that around is if they become threats, where maybe your lack of communication means, as an example, maybe that means that people struggle working with you, or they don't come to you when they have a problem. And then, of course, that's more of a threat than a weakness, right? And opportunities, look at what the world needs, what your company needs. What are the trends in the workplace? We were talking at the start of this webinar about this idea that companies are reskilling and pivoting their workforces so that everyone has AI-enabled skills. That's an example of an opportunity. Whether you're working in sales, consulting, or software engineering, if you can use that AI component, then you're going to be great. As an example here, how people might think about this, going back to the 4 job postings that we were looking at with BigCo, if you were someone like if you were maybe more, if you were doing the SWOT analysis, excuse me, and you notice that you really enjoy presenting on analytics, and you really enjoy thinking on your own, coming up with cool insights, and then going off and sharing them with the world, you might notice that your strengths are more aligned with the staff data scientist role. On the flip side, you might notice that you really like collaborative problem solving with customers. You like talking to users, you like coming up with feature ideas, you like demoing your software. Then maybe you're going to be more of a lead solutions consultant, and your strength goes down that path. Neither is wrong, both are great. And so this is how you might want to think about this. if you are exploring this and now starting your career, we talked a little bit about our friend Mike here, this 1 foot in, 1 foot out strategy. What you want to do is, generally the things you're exploring, you want to limit them to maybe 1 or 2 skills or things that you're learning. And then the things that you're good at, you're going to start building a bigger and bigger base. And so if you're starting off, let's say you just finished school and you've got an AI research background, maybe the first thing you're going to be learning is that software development side of things. Once you have the AI research and software development components together, maybe then you learn how to do requirements gathering, then product development, then managing people. And so what I recommend here oftentimes is have that base and work from that comfort zone in some ways, or that zone of strength, so that people know, yes, that's the person that does X really, really well. And then they'll forgive you if you make mistakes where you're learning in other areas. And Mike is a good illustration of this, because particularly if you look at these different industries, what he had at that point was a really strong base in customer analytics. The fact that he was working in real estate and maybe didn't know real estate very well was secondary. People would forgive him for the lack of real estate knowledge because he was still good at analyzing the data. The same with the CPG brand that he was working with, and now the pharma company. And you could see that even though he was learning lots of new things throughout, he was still being perceived as an expert and still progressing in his career, which is really, really powerful. In terms of how you might want to do this in your day-to-day, there's a few things to keep in mind here. So one is double loop learning. The second is the magic loop, completely unrelated loops, the grow model, and then something called good strategy, bad strategy. So I want to talk about double loop learning because it comes from a really great Harvard Business Review article that's over 30 years old now, called Teaching Smart People How to Learn. We're all, I imagine, very intelligent folks, very technical, many of us, and we often see the world in this single loop, which is we make decisions, we see what happens in the real world, we collect feedback and iterate on our understanding and our decision making. But of course, we've got a mental model that informs that decision making. And one of the things that a lot of really smart people tend to do that becomes a bit of a challenge for them later on in their careers is they make decisions, or they explain away, I'll put it this way, they explain away their mistakes. So something goes wrong and they say, well, that was inevitable, or that was not possible anyway. And it's not about them, it's about the situation, which eventually they start overlooking their weaknesses, those threats that I mentioned, etc. And so what you want to do with double loop learning is, as you collect information, inform your mental model, excuse me, and change it. I'll give you a very specific case study that comes up all the time with the companies that I work with. Technical experts saying no to projects or avoiding risk. People will say, okay, well, we need to build a new model, or we're going to train an LLM or something. And it's very easy to say, no, that's too expensive, or that's not going to work, or it's not possible. The R&D risk is just too high. And when I meet one-on-one with a lot of these technical experts, what I actually learn is, and as we have these conversations, is that they're actually afraid of failing. And so it's not that the project's too difficult. They're just worried about failing in a public way. And look, failing does suck. Not being able to deliver on a project can be really difficult. But learning, realizing that the problem wasn't truly that R&D risk or the budget or the timeline, but it was actually their own personal challenge, that's where their mental model changes. And then all of a sudden, I see them taking bigger risks. And so that's something that I would encourage you to do and to think about. It doesn't necessarily apply to risk taking. This can apply to other things. And if you're curious about challenging yourself in this way, I highly recommend reading Teaching Smart People How to Learn. The other piece, a little simpler, fortunately, is the magic loop. So the idea here is simply there's 5 steps to getting promoted. Do your job well, ask your manager how you can help, do what they ask for work that advances your career, do as they suggest. It sounds really, really simple, but it's amazing how many people don't do it. And I would say a few things to call out here. One is make sure your current job, you're doing it well. What I notice a lot of times is people will start a new role and they won't be doing their existing stuff well, but they're going to be asking or volunteering for new things and trying to move maybe a little too quickly or impatiently. And that just ends up hurting them in different ways. So really focus on doing your job well before starting to take on these bigger risks and opportunities. Some examples of how you might apply the magic loop: offer to mentor new employees, attend customer meetings. Attending customer meetings is something that I absolutely love when AI ML folks do this. And it's so rare for them to do it because oftentimes this is where you get an opportunity to explain your technology to people that might not be as familiar with it. Or this is an opportunity where you could talk about research concepts, simplify them, and also build relationships that inform your model, your actual models that you're building or the products that you're building. And I feel like this is one where not enough people take advantage of it. Supporting recruiting efforts for two reasons. One is, again, you get to meet a lot of great people, but then you'll also be on the other side of the table for once. You'll see how people pitch you. You'll see how people try to network with you, and that can inform your own networking and recruiting work and job search later. And then, of course, take on a high risk R&D task. There's a lot of these at companies. They're scary, again, because you might fail. But what's nice about high risk ones too is people might not be expecting you to succeed. So when you do actually succeed, when you work extra hard and push through, you get a lot more credit than you would otherwise. On the management side, there's a few things you might want to consider. The first and most important thing that I do want to emphasize, though, is that many employers struggle with management training. They simply don't provide it. And so what ends up happening is people learn to be managers when they get promoted to being managers. And this, by the way, have empathy for new managers for this very reason. It's so difficult because they've never done it before. They're not getting maybe the mentorship they deserve. So they're going to make mistakes. If you're reporting to someone or working with someone like that, just, give them some room and support them. The other piece that I would say is look for opportunities around collaborative problem solving. So one of the things that's really, really important here is, again, if you're focusing on management, you're going to be focused on facilitation. So try to bring people together, facilitate those meetings, and then explore how to influence, test hypotheses in meetings. If I'm a little more assertive at this meeting, what's going to happen? If I'm a little less assertive here, or if I'm going to push on the R&D risk in this meeting, what happens? I'm going to explain this new concept to a customer in a different way than I normally do. What happens then? These are all really great hypothesis-driven approaches to learn and develop yourself. And again, also ask to try management. I won't go through these bullet points because they're somewhat similar, but really the point here is go out and ask your managers, tell them, I'm interested in managing one day. How do I get some exposure here? And remember, of course, to keep learning. Again, we've got some great webinars from the past on this around nuances of data roles if you want to look at different opportunities. Also, getting ahead and staying ahead. Our last webinar really, really focused on upskilling and reskilling. This space, particularly AI ML right now, is changing so rapidly that you need to work on learning and keep learning. In fact, I'll give you one example of almost a negative case study here. For folks who have been in the NLP space for over a decade, I think this one will really resonate with you. 10 years ago, the world-class, state-of-the-art NLP type work was often focused on things called bag of words. Really, really simple. You literally count occurrences of text, count occurrences of tokens, and then you try to build correlations across those occurrences with sentiment or whatever else. Today, deep neural networks and transformers have completely transformed NLP. And one of the things that I see is some researchers who decided not to keep working on their technical expertise. They were doing really well on the bag of words side of things, are completely overwhelmed now. They've fallen behind. They're really struggling. And the flip side is people who are just starting their careers in some cases, who might only have 12 months of research experience, are actually building better models and outperforming those researchers. And so this is an example, I think, particularly apt right now. Things don't always change this fast, but something to be aware of and something to keep in mind, certainly. So putting all of this together, again, lots of different frameworks. You don't have to use them all. The point here is there's a few, use the magic loop to tactically plan your days and your weeks at a company. Use the double loop approach to learn and to challenge yourself. Do a SWOT analysis. When you put it all together, what I often recommend is basically using something like the GROW model, which focuses on four things: the goal, where do you want to be? The reality, where are you today? The obstacles, and then just do it. So suppose that you are you want to work in AI product management and you haven't really had the opportunity to do so because your reality is that you've been working in ML ops and you've been doing back-end work. Well, the obstacles are pretty clear, right? You need to speak to the product team. They need to build trust, and you need to build trust with them. You need to start thinking about how do product features get proposed. So these are all things that you can do. And, it's as simple as challenging yourself and say, well, can I speak to the product team this week or this month or tomorrow? Why not, right? The other piece that I think about a lot here is good strategy, bad strategy. Similar type of idea. Diagnose your problems and challenges. So what are the where are you today? And in this case, let's say that you have an MSc and you want to pivot into deep learning research, and for some reason, getting a PhD is not an option. Well, your guiding policy, similar to the GROW model, I need to learn to read research papers and apply them. I need to show I can understand cutting edge research. I need to network with those hiring in this space. I need a mentor. And so now you could create an action plan, right? Well, learn to read research papers probably means learn to build deep neural networks using PyTorch. If you have a boss, if this is in a work environment, maybe ask my boss for help and advice. And of course, reach out to Vector. Vector is a great resource that everybody should be using all the time. So those are examples of strategies that you could take. And again, taking a step back, what I really, really recommend here is be realistic. Be honest with yourself about where you're at. I think things like double loop learning and SWOT analyses will help you be a little more honest and data driven. But then you're also going to have to say, okay, well, based on this, how do I guide myself? How do I address the obstacles that I have? And then ultimately keep yourself honest with your action plan. One thing, again, from a data-driven perspective, as you do this, let's say every quarter or every year, if you notice you're not meeting your action plan, you're not doing the things you said you would do, or you're not getting the results that you would have expected by doing those things, then that's a great place to maybe have a reality check. And so with that, I just want to spend a minute or two on pivoting. I'll just stop for a minute and breathe. I I hope you're not overwhelmed. I know there's a lot here. And again, this webinar is being recorded, and I am definitely happy to share these slides. The point here is not that you need to do all of this today and be ready for it all tomorrow. You don't need a 50-page business plan for yourself, right? What is really important here is to know that these tools exist, number one. Number two, you're not the first person to have a lot of these challenges. And number three, there's a lot of different opportunities out there. I still remember when I was finishing undergrad, and basically the world seemed like you're either going to be a software engineer or a salesperson. That's it. Like that's the universe of options. And it was so scary and frustrating. Well, look, there's so many cool jobs out there that are so unique and different as we go through our careers. So with that, how do you tell if things aren't going well, right? Number one, I mentioned already this important piece around create an action plan, and diagnose yourself. Do you do the things you commit to? Because look, if you create an action plan and you're not doing them, then obviously that's what's going wrong, right? You're not doing the things you said you would do. If you are doing the things you're doing and you're not getting the results you're getting, then there's probably maybe a disconnect between the activities, or maybe you're not doing a great job. Look, we all make mistakes. We all have weaknesses, right? So maybe you're committing to things that aren't quite right for you. The other thing that I will say here too, by the way, is trust your gut. It's often your gut is a great place to go if you're feeling like something's wrong and you can't quite vocalize it or turn it into words. Think about that a little bit, explore it, and maybe even embrace it. And that's really, really important. In terms of a checklist of things you might want to do, again, a lot of this is very people oriented, but it is important. Having networking, talking to people who are going through the same challenges. Make sure you have mentors or a peer group of some sort, whether that's a formal peer group at work or an informal one with a few friends. One thing that's coming up a lot more now that I see is personal advisory boards. So the idea here is like find 2 or 3 people that you don't work with day to day, but that you could come back to on a regular basis and have a conversation with. Coaching, of course, meetups and events. And by the way, when I say coaching, the one-on-one sessions that we run, I'm always happy to chat about this stuff with folks. But I know Vector has a lot of different resources and groups and communities where you can have these conversations. And simply reaching out to folks and saying, hey, I'm with Vector and I'd love to, or I'm a researcher at Vector, or I'm finishing my MSc and I'm curious about X or Y, or I'm not sure how to proceed. People are often very, very happy to help, especially when it's not transactional. When you message them and say, hey, I'm looking for a job, people might be a little nervous to reply. But if you're asking them about how can I follow in your footsteps, you've got the job I want in 5 years, people are often very excited to have those conversations. So I'll stop here for a minute and see what questions are coming up. And there's some really, really interesting ones. Some of these I'm going to save for the panel because they're nice and juicy. So one of the things is around job postings that are looking for years of experience. How do I how do I address that? This is a really good question. If you are starting out your career and you don't have years of experience, I would say number one, sometimes these are nice to haves. So just make sure that you don't, still apply for the role. Number two, this is where volunteering comes in. I find people sometimes take the years of experience very, very literally. They think, okay, I need 3 years of experience specifically working as a software engineer. Listen, if you've been contributing to LangChain, again, just because I mentioned them as an example, for a year as an open source contributor, and you know how what their standards are, you know how to submit code, you know how to use GitHub Actions, you've got the same experience as people who have been working more formally. So just remember, frame those experiences, do that volunteering, etc. In terms of consulting positions, so one question that's coming up is consulting positions. What are some of the skills and capabilities that are being looked for there? This is the one where it's really focused on communication and facilitation. I generally recommend 2 or 3 things that people do if they want to be more on that kind of consulting side of things. One is emphasize the ability to architect and facilitate. Number two is emphasize your actual skills. Like, do you understand AI? You still have to know it a little bit. And all of this can be done via a portfolio. And one thing that I actually recommend is having some sort of a video portfolio where you record yourself communicating, because the consultant needs to communicate with clients, right? And so if I see a 60-second video where you're communicating a deep technical concept and simplifying it, I know you're going to be a great consultant. If you simply tell me in your resume that I know how to communicate well with clients, I have to take your word for it. I'm going to stop here because we're going to move to the panel, but we're going to try to address more questions there as well. So I would love to introduce our panelists. Shayna, who is an applied ML scientist at Vector Institute and has a focus on responsible AI. So Shayna, thank you so much for being here. She has over 10 years of research experience, dozens of journal and conference publications. She holds a PhD in Comp Sci from Toronto Metropolitan University and is also a postdoctoral fellow at Dalla Lana School of Public Health. One thing we haven't talked about in this webinar, but we do in past ones, is this idea of combining multiple subjects. So Shayna, I'm excited to hear about your experience of working in public health, working in comp sci, really exciting stuff. Sal is our second panelist. He's the Director of AI and Analytics Product Management at RBC Capital Markets. He's an MMAI grad from Queen's University. I know we've got a lot of those at Vector, so it's really cool to see someone who's a few years out now coming from that program. He also has an MSc in Financial Math from the University of Leeds. Sal's focus has been around AI product management, 0 to 1 product development, scaling data, and ML-driven products. So very much focused on that product management vision and side of things. So 2 very different profiles, very different types of work that people do. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see all of us. Thank you again for joining us. With this in mind, I'll start with one question that well, actually 2 questions, heads up, that I have for you. The first one is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever gotten when it comes to planning your long-term career path? Shayna, maybe we can start with you.
I think like for long-term career path, like first of all, we need to start very early. What are actually goals and interests, definitely. And I think like whatever thing that interests you, no matter what discipline is it should not be just the hype, but what interests you, what discipline interests you. So just like giving your focus time to it from the very beginning. For example, like some of my students, mentees, or interns that I work, so I always ask them the question that, like for example, some of them are now working in the Meta, Amazon, or other companies. So I asked them that, how did you plan your transition? So they said when we were in the high school or after the high school, we had this thing here in our mind, and we start doing, for example, this coding test or like this publication stuff, and we start planning from that, like much earlier than a average person start. So I think planning early is very, very much important. What is your focus? And once we decide, then we can give our focus time to this.
Wow, that is intimidating. And scary. Sal, what about yourself? What's the best piece of career advice you've gotten from a long-term planning perspective?
Yeah, I think somebody told me, and it still resonates with me, is like careers are not ladders, they are jungle gyms. And that is such a nicely worded way of saying those things, is that's something that always stood with me. So I never take career as a ladder progression, for sure, after that.
I love that. That's a really great saying because it really is for a lot of folks. So then the flip side of this, and maybe Sal, we can start with you. What is the worst piece of advice you've gotten? Advice that you heard and either maybe followed or didn't follow, and in hindsight, you're really happy that you didn't follow it.
Oh, oh, you're putting me on the spot over here. Um, I I think maybe again around the same aspect that you should always stay within the same discipline, and become more of a specialist maybe. And I'm maybe more biased towards, because I'm in product management and you have to know so many different things when it comes to products. So being married to just one thing and making that into a profession, because it's very hard to predict the future. And with where we are right now, I have always been more in favor of being a generalist as opposed to being a specialist. So I think that probably is one.
Wonderful. And Shayna, same question. What's bad advice you've gotten that either you wish you ignored or you did ignore?
I think like I cannot recall, but like sometimes some years ago, like from some mentors, like not the mentors, the supervisor, this kind of advice that you cannot do this. And I think that's the worst advice because I mean, all of us have the ability to do anything we wish. So that's the only thing in my mind.
Oh, I love that. And it's true, right? I mean, I think it's very one thing that I've seen going through all of this is the fact that I think determination is actually such a key part of it, right? It's easy to get dejected and uncomfortable and give up, but the people that stick it out are the ones that ultimately get the thing that they're looking for, right? So I love that. One of the sets of questions, this is like a theme of questions that's coming up through the Q&A, is this idea around generalist versus technical roles, of course. I mean, we've been talking about this quite a bit, but it seems like quite a few folks are concerned about, making that decision. And again, Shayna, maybe I'll start with you here because you've obviously really doubled down on research and you've been publishing quite a bit. I'm curious, how do you think, well, and by the way, and you're also working in other spaces like public health, which is really fascinating. So when you think about the trade-offs of going really deep from a technical perspective or not going deep necessarily, how do you think about that? Or what advice would you give people who are making this decision of, do I go deep on research versus maybe try a more generalist path?
I think like having a more generalist path is better. Like if I have to go 10 years back, so I will adopt
Oh.
this approach, being more generalist. The reason is that the deeper you go into your field, so sometimes like you face like challenges, for example, imposter syndrome, or like you get so much in the depth that you lose the bigger picture. So I think being generalist is better, and you can always then specialize in your particular field. That's my perspective.
Do you think that's the case? Is there a difference there with folks who want to be, who are, let's say, are getting PhDs and debating whether to stick it out in academia versus go into the corporate world, or does your advice apply to both?
I think this is only for the, I mean, this kind of advice for the people who want to go into the corporate world or industry. If somebody want to follow the PhD path, let's say like if somebody is planning to be an assistant professor or to be an academic or pure researcher, then I think a specialization, this path is good. Just like the way I am doing, for example, like I have been working in the news recommender systems like from 6 or 7 years now, and then even I work on the public health. My things are related to those fairness and the news recommender systems and the biases. So however, like if I have to give this advice to my mentees, and if they're not to the industry, so I will always say them, be journalists and like get a knowledge from each piece. It doesn't you get overwhelmed with all this information, but at least pick 5 6 focus area and then start concentrating them. So what I say them, then draw a Venn diagram and path, that what are the intersections of the field you want to work, and then start focusing on that.
Oh, that's wonderful. And last question for you, and don't worry, Sal, we're going to get to you and focus on product management in a minute as well. You know, you mentioned fairness, Shayna, and this is a really interesting area of AI research right now. And I know quite a few people want to be involved in it. Do you see do you see that as an explicit skill that people can be developing and working on and eventually building careers around? Or is it more kind of like communication, like where we should all kind of be aware of it, but you don't expect people to have like full-time roles focused on fairness and ethics in the way that we maybe would expect?
I think definitely this is going to be a very, very big area. The reason is that big tech companies, for example, Google, Meta, Microsoft, even Vector have their own like responsible AI principles. So definitely. So what I see basically now, like I know every day a new LLM pop up and it take all the feed in your LinkedIn or your Twitter, but like they are going to their maximum height. After this, what will happen? People will start working on the equity or the fairness or this aspect, because I think they have gone to the maximum height and now it's time to see them more responsibly. And definitely this is going to open many, many new job postings. For example, I myself these days see in the LinkedIn new kind of roles, for example, responsible AI data engineer, responsible AI ML specialist. So this is going to be a whole new thing, and especially with these LLMs, like the issues, for example, the AI risk, for example, the jailbreaking, the hallucinations and these kind of stuff. So definitely these tech companies, they need more people to come and work on these problems. So it is going to be a very new and 5 year, at least what I see.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you for that. And Sal, switching to you, I know one thing that's coming up in a lot of the Q&A here is also product management. A lot of people feel like this is a very soft, ill-defined space, but they also get excited about it because it feels like you could do so many different things here. What, you know, number one, I'd love to actually just hear, what does AI product management mean to you? And if you had advice to folks in terms of, you know, folks who want to start a career in this AI product management space, what would you recommend they do?
Yeah, no, I think product management as a principle has become now really defined. And if you go in, especially if you go in large tech companies or large corporations, they would have very defined role of what a product manager actually has to do. You can basically classify product managers into growth product managers, feature product managers, infrastructure product managers, and AI product managers. And essentially, if you're working in a large corporation, you have very defined career paths when you choose a particular field. I think from an AI product management perspective, you could definitely go into two different aspects. Either become an AI technical program manager, which is basically working with scientists, engineers, and building large infrastructure AI-based products. The other thing you could do is be more on the consumer side, either B2B or B2C, where you would have to have knowledge of AI. But I think more than that, you would need to have the knowledge of the customers. And if you are building something that customers actually like, and would they, if they come back to the application. So that requires a lot of skill set around customer acquisition, customer questions, UX design. So those things will always remain there, even if you are an AI product manager, for instance.
Interesting. And how, for people that aren't sure if they want to do product management, but they're certainly curious about it, what are things they could do to test whether this is something they'd enjoy or be good at?
Yeah, I think if you're working for a large corporation, even if you're an engineer, for instance, if you're an engineer who's trying to figure out whether product management is the right place for him, I think in large organizations you'll always be working with a product manager, and so working with him or her and tying in and looking into the work that they do, because some of the times the things that they would do are hidden away from the engineers, like talking to customers, doing strategy work. And I think in most cases, if you ask your product manager that I want to be a part of those discussions, either just be a silent spectator or be active in that role, I think they will give you that opportunity. So I think that could be a no risk way of finding out whether you actually like the role or not.
Oh, that's a great idea. I love that. And okay, so the other set of questions that we're getting here, quite a few of them, as you probably saw in the webinar, quite a few people are concerned about their job prospects right now. They I think it's something like 75%. I'm doing very quick mental math here, are either concerned or very concerned when it comes to the job search. And, you know, Sal, maybe again, starting with you here, for someone who's just starting, they're looking for their first job right now, coming out of school, what would be your recommendation what are the things they could do to maximize the likelihood that, you know, that the employer will reach out to them or follow up with their application?
Right. So I think the first thing that I want to say is I've been through these cycles a number of times. I've got like 15 years of experience. And I think as if I put myself in the shoes when I was coming out during the 2010 financial crisis, and it felt like the world was collapsing. And these things never continue for a very long period of time. And if you are in a field like AI, I think there's nothing much to be worried about. It's a small cycle that will pass. So I just want to start off with saying that I think the things that you can do to showcase is be out there, be networking, take part in projects, do voluntary work. In my cases, I love to connect with people. I host events that really helps in product management, speaking to clients, all of that you can practice as a result of that. So I would say doing things outside of work is really, really important. And don't stop that once you find a job. And you doing that. Because I think one of the things that has helped me a lot is being introduced to new fields that I wasn't even aware of. And I was like, wow, I'm really excited about these things. And just networking with people and finding out about things opens up the world for you. So I think don't ever stop that.
Okay, you've got me curious. What's a field, like a new field that's opened up to you because of all of this that you didn't even know exists?
Yeah, so I'm actually, Wojciech, probably I told you, I'm in the process of fundraising, and the entire VC field was something that was not like I wasn't sure about. I knew that existed, but it felt so far away. But then I started talking to people who are actually in that field, and I was like, look, man, this is not so hard to do. Or I love this thing, and it involves talking to people, and I have a lot of skills that I already have. And so so that's something that I learned as I was interacting with people who are in that field. So that's one thing that opened up for me for sure.
Oh, that's such a great example. I don't think anyone's told me in the Q&A that they want to be a VC yet, so maybe that'll change. And Shayna, same question for you. Or you know, what advice would you have for folks to make sure that they stand out, or make sure that they really emphasize their competence and capabilities, and that they get responses from folks they're applying to?
Yeah, I agree very much with what Sal has mentioned, like networking and like going out of your comfort zone and like updating yourself. That's very important. For example, like there was a time around 2016 or 17 when I was working in Pure ML. So somebody advised me that I just recall. So she said that quickly update yourself for the deep learning, because this is going to be the next thing, and what are you working is going to be obsolete. So I think updating yourself, networking, having some feeds, having a right mentor and some guidance. Even sometimes we have to volunteer in some of the projects just to get a sense that how people are working. These all things help in your personality building and your career paths. And yeah, I mean, that's very much I have to say.
Oh, that's so I love this though. So in 2016, you've got a mentor or someone that you know tells you you got to do the deep neural networks thing or the deep learning thing. What did you literally just take their advice, or were you a little skeptical at the time? Like, what was your thought process like?
So first time when she gave me the advice, she was my PhD supervisor. I didn't like this because I worked so hard on my thesis and everything. But then I realized, no, she's right. And now after years, I realized that she was 100% right, because some of my peers who didn't have a transition during that time, so like they're facing a lot of difficulties even after PhD. So PhD doesn't mean that you get your dream job, but like you have to be very updated, and like your research should be state of the art, then it works. And same way, like these days, like as Sal is also mentioning, it's not just about the LLMs, but also there are many things that's going on. We have to update ourselves and be presentable for the challenges of the jobs. For example, like these days, if I see like the working environment is more hybrid, like live and remote, so you should be prepared for all these kind of role, like how you're going to work, and in a multicultural organization and all these things. So these are all the factors I think that are needed. At least like if I have to give somebody advice to some of my mentees, I just say that update yourself and take some mentoring sessions. Sometimes your mentor is more useful to you than your direct supervisor. So these are all the factors, and there are many people who are volunteer to mentor you. So I think we can always reach out to those people.
Oh, I love that. And that's so interesting too. I mean, it's great that you had such a supervisor that was encouraging you to explore this and that you listened to them, frankly.
Yeah.
Both of you, Sal and Shayna, both of you mentioned volunteering and projects as well. Are there specific types of projects that you would want people to do that like would get you particularly excited? Like if you saw a resume and they had volunteer work that focused on X would be like, yes, I need to talk to them. Is there something like that comes out for you?
So like when I see somebody resume and somebody want to volunteers me, like first of all, I definitely see the passion of the person, because sometimes a person, when he or she comes to you, he may not be very well prepared, but the person has the passion to learn. So they are always the best learners and they rise. Other than this, like related to my field, basically I see like they should have little bit component of this public health and healthcare and this fairness, because I know this is an area which is gaining most attention in the next 10 years. Like if you work in the public health and health equity and the fairness in machine learning or AI, composition of all these things is very unique. So I see these kind of things. If that's your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And Sal, same question for you. What are there specific types of volunteer work or experiences that would make a resume stand out for you?
Yeah, no, first of all, I would agree with China. I think first of all, I look for passion and just the ability to have gone out and tried new things. That's something that I'm looking for, and it should be apparent when you are in an interview or speaking to the person who is hiring you. I think the other thing is, like, from a product management perspective, I think there are a lot of avenues now available for people to do things outside of work. So for instance, becoming a tester for a new product, going up on Product Hunt and becoming a product tester, for instance, giving valuable feedback, being able to show those skills. I think I would advise everyone to take Reforge. I'm a great supporter of Reforge as a product management program. If you're not doing that, you're missing out. So they have a lot of side projects on the side as well that you can be part of. Lenny's newsletter is amazing. So if you want to be a part of that and listen to podcasts, for instance, and they do a lot of, like, if you join his community, there is a lot of projects that are going on the side. You can take part of in those projects. So I think if you show that ability, that you have gone out, you understand the community, you have reached out to people, I have no doubt that you will be able to figure out what's going on in the work. So I think that's.
I love that. And one question, so a few very tactical ones, since we've got about 3-4 minutes to go. One that comes up a lot, and certainly people are asking about now, is how important is a PhD? And so Sal, obviously, you're coming at this from product management. You don't have a PhD. Do you recommend people get one in hindsight? And Shayna, we'll ask you afterwards as well.
No, not from a product management perspective. I think you don't need a PhD in product management. If you're going for a very deep technical AI role, then a PhD might help. But certainly not even for a technical program manager or a product manager you would need. For a very technical product, I would say master's would probably be the requirement, but there's nothing more.
And Shayna, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with Sal. Like many of these, high profile jobs, for example, the manager and being the director, they don't require the PhD. PhD is good if you are very much research focused. For example, like if I see my profile from the beginning, I always wanted to go very much into detail of the algorithm. So that forced me kind of to go towards the PhD. So that's what. PhD is required if there's certain jobs, for example, the scientist role or some assistant professor, associate professor, or research scientist, then PhD is required. But for all the other roles, I mean, at least the job postings I see, they don't require PhD. However, they require more versatile skills. And also in my experience, when I work with many people in Vector also and outside, so what I find, like sometimes the people who don't have the PhD, they sometimes provide very detailed and better solutions. So there's no bias that only PhD can give you the best solution. It's just that how the person see the problem, and the experience matter a lot. So that's why I think during your studies, whether you're doing bachelor's or master's, having some industry and academic kind of experience as we provide in the Vector also, I think that's the best case.
Oh, I love that. Okay, one last question, which is this one's very specific, but I'm actually very curious what both of you think. So someone mentioned NVIDIA's CEO, his recent comments that people don't need to learn to code because AI will do it for them one day. Shayna, agree or disagree, and why?
I disagree because no matter how fast your chatbot or your robot or whatever that thing is, that like there's some ethical aspect which is missing in those things. That's for sure. And the human intervention is the best. Like we are the creators of the technology, and if they are going to lead us, that is not going to work. They can assist us, but they cannot. Take the place of the people who have spent years of their life doing the coding and doing this stuff.
Fair enough. Sal, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think I disagree as well. I think there's a lot of hot debate that's going out in the industry right now whether LLM are reasoning and planning agents, and the answer is not. They are not reasoning and planning agents. They are just they're not reasoning and planning agents. So until the technology gets to a point where they are actual intelligence, I don't think they can ever take up the role of a good 10x 100x developer.
Okay. Well, you know, when we're running a webinar like this 5 or 6 years from now, we'll have to go back to the recording and see what happened. Well, thank you both very, very much for joining us. Any last words of advice before you drop off, Shayna, Sal?
No, I think you covered everything.
Yeah, I think you have covered everything. I totally agree.
Oh, well, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this. You're getting lots of applause, virtual applause and hearts here. So we appreciate that you're both part of the Vector community, and I'm sure people will be reaching out to you as well. So thank you both very much.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. So before we conclude, I will go back to sharing my screen here if I figure out how to do that. Oh, there it is. Okay. So thank you all very, very much for joining us today. If I realize there were a lot of questions here that we did not get through. If you do have any questions, my email is w@phaseai.com. Don't hesitate to reach out. And of course, finally, thank you to the Vector Institute for organizing this. Thank you to all of Vector's funders as well. This was a great session. Thank you, Sal, Shayna. Thank you, Johanna. And we hope you all have a wonderful day and good luck in your career planning. Bye, everyone.